Stories at Work.
Welcome back to Stories at Work. Today's a fictional dramatized IT/client success story, where the work was mine, the praise wasn't, and the celebration felt like a warning. The client was called Marrowgate Health, a mid-size healthcare group with a contract worth $12 million over 3 years. We weren't just providing support. We ran their scheduling platform, patient messaging, and the data bridge to their billing vendor. If our system hiccuped, their clinics backed up. If their clinics backed up, their CFO called my phone, not my boss's. I was a senior customer success lead on paper. In practice, I was the person they called when things got ugly. And that Monday started ugly. At 6:42 in the morning, my phone lit up with an email chain that already had too many people copied. Their CFO, Lysander Quill, had written 2 sentences that made my stomach tighten. They were freezing payments. They were taking the renewal to legal. No insults, no threats. That calm tone was worse. It meant the decision had already been discussed internally. The reason was a downtime incident from the weekend. 1 hour where appointment confirmations didn't go out. Patients flooded call centers. Clinics blamed Marrowgate's leadership. Leadership blamed us. What my boss wrote back in the thread was pure corporate comfort food. Appreciate the partnership. Fully aligned. We'll do a root cause. No numbers. No plan. No ownership. I wasn't supposed to jump into executive threads without being asked. That's the kind of thing managers call stepping on toes right up until the moment it saves them. So I did the thing I always did. I opened the logs. By 7:15, I had a timeline that was inconvenient. The outage wasn't caused by our platform failing. It was caused by an integration change Marrowgate's billing vendor pushed late Friday. Something they'd scheduled without telling anyone and then blamed on us when it broke. I had proof. Clean proof. Time-stamped, boring, undeniable. I forwarded it to my boss, Ronan Fairchild, with a short note. This wasn't us. Vendor change triggered the queue failure. If we show them the timeline and propose a patch plus credit, we can keep renewal intact. He read it within a minute, and then he didn't respond. Instead, he called me. Not to thank me, just to control the frame. Okay, he said, voice too calm. Don't send anything to them yet. I already replied in the thread, I said. I didn't blame anyone. I just said we're investigating and I'll call Lysander in an hour. A pause, long enough to hear him deciding which version of me he needed. Listen, he said. Marrowgate is sensitive. They don't want vendor drama. They want confidence. Keep it vague. We'll handle the politics. Politics. That word is what bad managers use when they mean, let me take credit, and if it goes wrong, I'll say you acted alone. But I was tired, not just need coffee tired. I mean the kind of tired where you realize you've been measuring your self-worth in other people's calm emails. So I played it straight. I set up a call with Lysander for 9:30, built a 1-page timeline, and wrote talking points that focused on outcomes, not blame. Patch plan, monitoring changes, a small service credit, calm and professional. The call went well, almost too well. Lysander didn't want to fight. He wanted someone to tell him the truth, without making him look weak in front of his CEO. By the end of the call, he said, if you put that plan in writing today, I can keep legal out of it. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt that familiar pressure behind my eyes, because I knew what came next. Saving the client was never the hardest part. The hardest part was what my company did after you saved them. At 10:12, I sent the follow-up email, tight, clear, professional, copying my boss and our director. At 10:16, my boss replied, all with 3 lines. Great discussion this morning. Appreciate everyone's urgency. Let's regroup internally before we commit to credits. Then he messaged me privately. Nice. Stay close. I'll take it from here. That phrase, I'll take it from here, should have been a compliment, but it hit me like a door closing because I already knew Ronan's pattern. He'd ride the win upward, then hand the cost downward. And 2 hours later, he proved it. At noon, he posted in the team chat, "Pizza in the break room, quick celebration, don't be late." People started reacting with little emojis, fire, claps, the usual forced cheerfulness. My teammate Ksenia Vale leaned over my desk and whispered, "He's actually doing something nice?" I didn't answer. I was staring at my screen, rereading Lysander's last line. "Please send the plan today so I can close this." Because my boss had said regroup internally, like the client's deadline was negotiable. And because I'd seen this movie before, the moment the crisis ends, leadership suddenly remembers process. At 12:05, the break room smelled like cheap pepperoni and warm cardboard. Ronan stood there like a host at a fundraiser, smiling too widely. He had the pizza box open like it was a trophy. "Team," he said, loud enough for the whole floor to hear, "we kept a major account calm today." People clapped. A few laughed like it was a real party. Then he looked straight at me and said, "And our guy here did a great job." He reached into the box, lifted a slice, and held it out to me. "One slice," he said, like he was being funny. $5 motivation. Works every time. The room laughed, because that's what you do when your boss makes a joke and you want to keep your job. I took the slice. The paper plate was so thin it bent in my hand. And I smiled, because I understood the rule in that moment. If you accept the slice, you accept the message. You're not a person who saved a $12 million client. You're a cost line that performed. Ronan turned back to the team, still smiling, and added, casually, like it was nothing, "By the way, we're not doing credits. We'll monitor and move on. Don't overpromise to clients." My jaw tightened, because I hadn't overpromised. I'd promised what would keep the contract alive. And if we broke that promise, Lysander wouldn't blame Ronan. He'd blame the person he trusted on the call. Me. I stood there with grease on my fingers and watched my boss rewrite the story in real time. And that was when I made the first decision that would change how this ended. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just pulled out my phone, opened my notes, and wrote down exactly what he said, word for word, because I finally understood something simple. If they were going to treat me like a number, I could beat them like a number. After lunch, I went back to my desk and did the thing I'd trained myself to do in corporate life. I swallowed it. Not because I agreed, because I understood the math. If I challenged Ronan in public, he'd frame me as emotional. If I challenged him in private, he'd call it attitude. And if the client exploded, he'd act surprised and say, "We were aligned," until he went rogue. So I stayed calm. I ate my slice like it didn't taste like disrespect. And I opened my laptop like it was just another Monday. But my hands didn't feel like my hands. Marrowgate's CFO needed a written plan that day. He'd been clear. And I knew something else Ronan didn't seem to respect. Healthcare groups don't calm down. They document. They escalate. They punish vendors quietly. At 2:20, Lysander emailed again, "Checking in. Can you send the written plan before end of day?" I stared at the message for a few seconds, then forwarded it to Ronan with one line. "They need it today. If we stall, legal will re-enter." He replied almost immediately, "Handled. No details." No draft. No plan. I watched the minutes slide by, and my stomach did that slow, sinking thing it does when you realize you're about to be blamed for someone else's decision. So I did what any professional does when they can smell a scapegoat forming. I built a paper trail, not dramatic, not aggressive, just clean. I took the timeline I'd already prepared, added our technical root cause summary, and wrote a one-page action plan that didn't sound like a confession. It sounded like competence, monitoring adjustments, integration safeguards, weekend change freeze windows, response time commitments, and I wrote it in a way that was careful. No vendor screwed up. No, we weren't at fault. Just, here's what happened. Here's what we're doing. Here's what you can tell your CEO. Then I saved it, twice. Once in the client folder like normal. Once in my own private working directory with a timestamp in the file name. Because if you've ever lived through corporate politics, you learn that the truth isn't what happened. The truth is what can be proven. At 3:10, Ronan finally came to my desk. He didn't sit. He stood over my monitor like he owned the pixels. "Why are you still on Marrowgate stuff?" he asked. "Because Lysander is asking for the plan," I said. "We need to send something today?" Ronan smiled, small and controlled. "Look," he said, lowering his voice like this was friendly coaching. "You did great on the call, but you can't promise credits. You don't have that authority." "I didn't promise anything outside a small service credit," I said. "It's the thing that keeps legal out." He tilted his head as if I was missing something obvious. "We're not paying them to do their jobs," he said. "This is not how we run accounts." That sentence told me everything. It wasn't about money. It was about power. Ronan didn't care about the client leaving because Ronan wouldn't be the one rebuilding trust at midnight. That would be me. So I tried one more time, carefully. "Okay," I said. "Then we need an alternative that achieves the same outcome. Something Lysander can take to leadership." He tapped the edge of my monitor with a finger, like he was tapping the conversation into place. "We give them confidence," he said. "We say we're investigating and we'll monitor closely. No promises, no credits. Simple." And then he added the part that turned my stomach. "And just so we're clear, stop sending your own documents to executives. You're making this messy." I blinked once. He wasn't mad that I'd done good work. He was mad that the client had seen me do it. Because visibility is currency, and Ronan didn't want me earning any. He leaned in closer and said, "Forward anything you draft to me. I'll decide what goes out." Then he walked away. I sat there and stared at my screen. On the surface, it was normal corporate hierarchy. Managers approve client communication, but I felt the trap closing. Because if Ronan controlled what went out, he controlled what failed. And if what failed came back, it would land on the person who'd been on the call. I checked the time. 4:40. Lysander's working day was ending soon. And then my phone buzzed, not email. A calendar invite. Subject: Marrowgate renewal. Risk: leadership touchpoint time. 5:30. Attendees: Ronan, the director, and not me. No client on the invite, just leadership. That's when the irritation turned into something colder. Because I knew exactly what was about to happen. They were going to hold a meeting about a client I'd been saving, without the person who'd been speaking to the client, which meant the meeting wasn't about solving the problem. It was about shaping the story. I didn't march into Ronan's office. I didn't send an angry message. I didn't do anything that could be spun as unprofessional. I just did one quiet thing. I opened my email and sent myself a short message, from my work account to my personal archive address, a copy of the timeline, a copy of the draft plan, and the exact thread where Lysander said legal would stay out if we sent it today. Not because I wanted to be dramatic, because I wanted to survive. At 5:28, the meeting started without me, and at 5:39, my phone rang. It was Lysander. I answered, and his tone was completely different from the morning, tight, controlled, and angry in the way people get when they've been embarrassed in front of leadership. "Your boss just called me," he said. My heart sank. "What did he say?" I asked, even though I already knew the shape of it. Lysander exhaled once. "He told me you were enthusiastic," he said, "but that you may have overstated what your company can commit to." My mouth went dry, because there it was. The first move, the separation, the way you cut the rope and let the person below you fall. And Lysander wasn't done. He also said, Lysander continued, that there would be no written plan today, that we can discuss it next week. Next week, in healthcare renewal cycles, next week means we're shopping your replacement. I stared at my monitor, my pulse heavy in my ears, and in that moment, I made a decision that was so calm it almost scared me. If Ronan wanted to control the story, I was going to control the evidence. Because I wasn't about to lose a $12 million account and my reputation. so a manager could feel powerful after a $5 pizza joke. I took a breath and said to Lysander, "Give me 10 minutes." He paused. 10 minutes for what? "For something you can take to your CEO tonight," I said. "Something that matches what we discussed this morning." Silence. Then he said, "Okay." And as I opened the draft plan again, my phone buzzed with a message from Ronan. "Do not send anything. We already aligned." I looked at the words, and I realized something that made me almost laugh. Ronan wasn't trying to protect the company. He was trying to protect his ego. And now I had a choice. If I obeyed him, I'd lose the client, and he'd blame me for overstating. If I saved the client, I'd be labeled difficult. Either way, Ronan was preparing a version of the story where he stayed clean. So I wrote the plan like my career depended on it, because it did. And when I hovered over send, my finger didn't shake. Because that night, I stopped being the hero. I started being the person who keeps receipts. I didn't send the plan right away, not because I backed down, because I needed it to land like a professional document, not a desperate move that Ronan could later call an emotional overreach. So I did it the way corporate people understand, clean, measurable, and impossible to twist. I opened a fresh file and rebuilt the whole thing from scratch, even though I already had a draft. Same substance, tighter language. I formatted it as a short service stabilization plan, with a timestamp, version number, and my name as the author in the footer. Nothing dramatic, just standard accountability. Then I added 3 things that would matter to a CFO, a timeline with exact times, a prevention section with specific controls, and a commitment line that didn't mention money, but still gave Lysander something he could use. Instead of service credit, I wrote, "We will apply an adjustment to your next invoice consistent with the SLA severity tier for this incident, pending your confirmation of impacted clinics." That sentence meant the same thing as a credit, but it sounded like governance, not weakness. At 6:03, I sent it to Lysander, not as a surprise, not as a rebellion, as a follow-up to our morning call. I wrote, "Per our discussion earlier today, attached is the stabilization plan and the incident summary. If you'd like, I can walk your CEO through the timeline in 10 minutes. I copied Ronan, not because I wanted him involved, because I wanted him documented. 2 minutes later, Ronan called me. He didn't greet me. He didn't ask what I sent. He went straight to control. "Are you out of your mind?" he said. His voice was low, almost whispering, the way people talk when they're furious, but trying not to leave evidence. "I sent what Lysander requested," I said. Calm. "It's aligned with what we discussed on the call this morning." "We discussed that you don't commit," he snapped. "I didn't commit outside the SLA framework," I said. "And I didn't blame anyone. It's a plan, not an apology." Silence. Then a different tone, slower, sharper. "You don't get to decide what goes out," he said. "You're not the account owner. You're not leadership." There it was again, not about the client, about hierarchy. "Ronan," I said, still calm, "if we lose Marrowgate, you'll still have your title. I'll be the one they point to. I'm protecting the relationship we built today." He laughed once, short and humorless. "You're protecting yourself," he said. "That's what this is." And I almost told him the truth, that yes, I was protecting myself, because he had already started tossing me under the bus. But I didn't, because arguing with someone like Ronan is like wrestling in mud. You don't win, you just get dirty. So I said one sentence and ended the call. "I did my job. We can talk tomorrow." I hung up before he could answer. My hands were steady. My stomach wasn't. Then I waited. Lysander replied at 6:18, "Thank you. This is what I needed. CEO wants a short call tomorrow morning. Please join." Join. Not Ronan. Not your leadership. Me. I stared at that word like it was a crack of light in a room I didn't realize had gotten dark. Because it meant the client saw who was actually holding the wheel. But I didn't get to enjoy it for long. At 6:45, my calendar updated. Ronian had added himself to the call, and he changed the title. From CEO stabilization call to leadership alignment messaging. Messaging, like the truth was a branding exercise. Then I saw a second invite, sent to my director and someone I'd never met. Caldwell Price, VP of Revenue. That name mattered. Caldwell was the kind of VP who talked in margins, not people. The kind of executive who could decide in one meeting that you were not a culture fit. And I knew exactly what Ronan was doing. He wasn't going to argue the facts. He was going to argue the optics. He was going to frame me as the guy who went around process, who risked the relationship, who made promises. And if I reacted emotionally, he'd win. So I did the only move that ever beats corporate storytelling. I prepared evidence in a way that looked like competence, not revenge. That night, I built a simple package for the morning call. One slide, just one, with the incident timeline. One slide with the prevention controls. One slide with a line that said, "We are accountable for service outcomes regardless of upstream changes." It was diplomatic. It made Marrowgate feel respected. It didn't start a vendor war. And then I made my own copy, saved outside the shared folder, because shared folders can be cleaned up. By midnight, I had a tight narrative that couldn't be misrepresented, and I had a quiet certainty in my chest. If Ronan tried to rewrite the story in front of the client's CEO, he was going to do it on a stage where I had the receipts. The next morning at 8:58, I joined the call early, camera off, mic muted. Ronan joined a minute later, already smiling, already in performance mode. Then the client's CEO joined, Dr. Selena Hartwell, and she didn't smile at all. She looked straight into the camera and said, "I don't have a lot of time. I want clarity." Ronan jumped in immediately. "Of course," he said. "We've been doing a full investigation," and she cut him off with a small hand gesture. "No," she said. "I don't want marketing language." Then she looked at the participant list, found my name, and said, "You." The one who sent the plan. My pulse rose, but my voice stayed even. "Yes, Dr. Hartwell." She nodded once. "Walk me through it," she said. "Start with what actually happened." I could feel Ronan's eyes through the screen, and I realized the balance had shifted, because the person with authority had just chosen who she trusted. And Ronan, my boss, was about to learn something he'd never considered. If you treat the person doing the work like a replaceable line item, sometimes the client stops listening to you at all. Dr. Celine Hartwell didn't want a story. She wanted a timeline. So I gave her one. I shared my screen and walked through it, step by step, Friday vendor change window. The exact moment our queue began to choke. The alert thresholds that should have caught it sooner. The manual bypass we deployed. And the prevention controls we were putting in place. No drama, no blame, just facts and fixes. Ronan tried to interrupt twice. The first time he said, "Just to add context." Dr. Hartwell lifted a finger without looking at him. "Let him finish." The second time he said, "We're fully aligned." Lysander Quill cut in, voice flat. "We weren't aligned yesterday." That landed like a door slamming. I kept going. When I reached the invoice adjustment line, I said it carefully. "We'll apply an adjustment consistent with the SLA severity tier, once you confirm impacted clinics. That keeps governance clean and fair." Dr. Hartwell nodded once. "That's reasonable." Ronan's smile froze for half a second. Then Dr. Hartwell asked the question that mattered. "Who approved this?" she said, eyes moving from the document to the faces on the call. Silence. Ronan jumped in fast. "I did. Ultimately, I didn't correct him. Not yet. Because I'd learned something. You don't win by arguing in the moment. You win by letting people hang themselves with their own eagerness." Dr. Hartwell didn't even react. She just said, "Fine." What I care about is whether the plan is executed. Then she looked at me again. "And you," she said, "will you be the one accountable for delivery?" Ronan leaned forward, ready to claim that too. But Lysander spoke first. I want him on point, he said. He's the one who responded like an adult. Ronan blinked like he'd been slapped. Dr. Hartwell nodded. Agreed. Put it in writing. Today. And then she added, almost casually, also, send me your incident report template. I want our vendor management team to standardize on this format. That's when I felt it. The smallest surge of relief, like a knot loosening. Because now the plan wasn't just saving the renewal, it was becoming the standard. The call ended in under 15 minutes. Dr. Hartwell left. Lysander stayed 10 seconds longer and said, thank you, then dropped. Ronan didn't hang up. He stared at me through the camera with that calm, controlled expression managers use when they're deciding how to punish you, without looking petty. You embarrassed me, he said. I answered their questions, I replied. You went around process, he said, and now you've made it look like leadership doesn't control its team. I kept my voice level. Leadership should control outcomes. His jaw tightened. Here's what's going to happen, he said. You're going to send me everything before it goes out. You'll stay off executive threads, and you'll remember who signs your review. Then he ended the call, and right after that, the second punch arrived. An email from Caldwell Price, the VP of Revenue. Subject, Conduct and Client Messaging. Short, cold. It said Caldwell wanted a meeting that afternoon with Ronan present. No agenda, no context. That kind of meeting is never about alignment. It's about establishing a narrative before anyone else can. But that was just the beginning. I didn't panic. I didn't vent to coworkers. I didn't send a defensive essay that could be forwarded and laughed at. I did 3 precise things. First, I exported the full email thread with headers, timestamps, recipients, message IDs. The boring metadata people forget exists until legal asks for it. Second, I pulled the calendar history that showed the leadership meeting Ronan held without me, and the time Ronan called Lysander and reframed me as enthusiastic. Third, I wrote a 1-page client retention risk summary for Caldwell. Not emotional, just risk language, contract value, renewal date, legal escalation trigger, mitigation steps, and the fact that the client's CEO requested my ownership in writing. Then I forwarded it to Caldwell before the meeting invite. 1 page. No accusations, no adjectives, just, this is the account status. This is the plan. This is what the client asked for, and this is what we must deliver to prevent churn. If Ronan wanted to paint me as a rogue employee, I was going to force him to do it in front of a VP while holding a document that looked like competence. And then, because I'd been burned before, I did one more thing. I sent a short note to Aldrich Sloan in legal operations. Not my friend, not my enemy, just the kind of person who lives inside process. Subject, retention documentation question. I asked one neutral question. What's the best practice for archiving client critical comms when an account is in renewal risk, so nothing gets lost if teams change? Aldrich replied 5 minutes later with a policy link in 1 line. Keep a copy in the renewal case file and include the executive thread exports. Perfect. Now it wasn't me hoarding receipts. It was policy. And when the meeting time arrived, I walked in with a laptop, a 1-page summary, and a case file that followed internal procedure so closely that nobody could accuse it of being personal. Because it wasn't revenge. It was governance. In corporate conflicts, the safest leverage is documentation that looks routine, not emotional. Export threads, keep timelines, and anchor everything to policy so it can't be framed as personal. If you must challenge a manager's narrative, do it through risk language and deliverables, not accusations. And always assume the first meeting without you is about shaping blame, not solving the problem. The meeting with Caldwell was set for late afternoon, in one of those glass rooms that makes everything feel like a trial, even when nobody says the word. Ronan was already there when I walked in. Laptop open, posture relaxed, like he'd been waiting to greet the judge. Caldwell arrived last. He didn't shake hands. He didn't smile. He sat down, glanced at Ronan, then at me. "All right," he said. "I heard we had a client risk incident and a messaging problem." Ronan exhaled like a man burdened by other people's immaturity. "We handled the client," he said smoothly. "But there were unauthorized commitments and unnecessary escalation. I'm addressing it." Caldwell's eyes shifted to me. "Did you make commitments you didn't have authority to make?" I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself like it was personal. I slid my laptop slightly forward and opened the one-page summary. "Here's what was requested," I said. "Here's what was sent. Here's the language used." Then I showed him the exact sentence from the plan. The invoice adjustment, consistent with the SLA severity tier, pending confirmation of impact. No dollar amount, no grand promise, just governance. Caldwell didn't react. He just asked, "Who asked for the plan?" I pulled up Lysander's email, timestamp, clear, explicit. "Send the plan today so legal stays out." Then I pulled up the follow-up. "CEO wants a short call tomorrow morning. Please join." Caldwell looked at Ronan. "You told the client there would be no written plan that day?" Ronan's smile tightened. "We needed internal alignment. We didn't want to." Caldwell raised a hand. "Internal alignment doesn't outrank renewal risk." Then he turned back to me. "Did you send it after your manager told you not to?" I paused long enough to keep my tone clean. "Yes," I said, "because the client gave a deadline tied to legal escalation, and because my manager had already told them I overstated commitments, which put my credibility at risk." Ronan's head snapped slightly. "That's not what I said. I didn't say he lied. I opened the thread export. Same day, same time, same exact phrase from Lysander's call summary. Your boss said you may have overstated what your company can commit to." Caldwell stared at the screen for a long second. Then he leaned back and said something I'll never forget. "So we had a $12 million renewal on the edge, and instead of protecting the relationship, you protected your ego." Ronan's face flushed. "That's not fair." Caldwell cut him off, calm and clinical. "You removed the person the client trusted from the leadership touchpoint," he said. "You reframed him to the client as enthusiastic to create distance. Then you blocked the deliverable that kept legal out. That's not leadership. That's self-preservation." Ronan tried to recover. "The process exists for a reason." He went around approval. Caldwell nodded once, like he'd heard enough. "Process exists to prevent risk," he said, "not to create it." He looked at me again. "You're now the accountable owner for Marrowgate Delivery until renewal closes," he said. "You'll send your updates directly to me and Director Rhea. Copy your manager if you want. You don't need permission to prevent churn." Ronan went still. Caldwell continued. "And Ronan, effective immediately, you're off that account. We'll discuss your people management issues separately." There was a heavy silence after that, the kind where you can hear the building's air system working. Then Caldwell stood up. "One more thing," he said, picking up his laptop. "I don't want to hear the words pizza party associated with client retention again." He left. Ronan stayed seated. He didn't look at me. He stared at the table like he was watching his own career slide away in slow motion. For a few seconds I thought he might say something human. An apology, even a weak one. Instead, he said, quiet and bitter, "You think you won?" I didn't raise my voice. "I think the client stayed," I said. "That's the point." I walked out without another word. Over the next 2 weeks, I executed the plan exactly as written. Monitoring thresholds, integration guardrails, a weekend change freeze window with the vendor, a clean incident report format that Marrowgate's vendor management team adopted. The invoice adjustment went through under the SLA tier, documented and approved. Lysander's emails went from tense to practical. On the final day of the quarter, the renewal came in. 3 years, full value, no legal involvement. That afternoon, Caldwell sent a short internal note. Marrowgate renewal closed. Credit to delivery execution and clear client communication. No emojis, no pizza, no performance, just a line that mattered. A week later, Ronan's title changed in the org chart. He was moved into an internal role with no direct reports. The kind of quiet demotion companies use when they don't want drama, but they do want the behavior to stop. And me? I got a raise and a new comp letter the following cycle, because once the client's CEO knows your name, it becomes expensive for leadership to pretend you're replaceable. The funniest part is the only time I ever thought about that slice again was months later, when someone in a meeting joked about motivating teams with food. I didn't laugh. I didn't get angry. I just said calmly, if we're celebrating retention, celebrate the work. If we're cutting costs, don't cut respect. No one argued, because the lesson wasn't about pizza. It was about control. If someone tries to treat you like a cost line, don't scream. Don't beg. Don't rant. Document. Deliver. Anchor yourself to policy. And let outcomes do what emotions never can. Make the truth undeniable. If you like the story and want more endings where documents, facts, and a cool head decide everything, drop a like and subscribe to Stories at Work. Now tell me in the comments, if you were in my shoes, would you stay quiet for the sake of peace? Or would you document everything too? Emails, timelines, and policy.